All right, well hello everybody and welcome to Pendarvis Historic Site. We're one of 12 historic sites owned by the state, and my name's Ellie. I'm going to be your guide today. So today's tour is going to go through 3 historic buildings, well technically 4 if you count this one. But we're going to go into 3 Cornish mining homes that were built in the 1830s and 1840s. And those homes were built by the Cornish miners that came here from Cornwall. So Cornwall is the southernmost county in England, right down here on our map. Cornwall had a large mining industry, especially for tin, for many years, but when that industry started to decline in the early to mid-1800s, the Cornish miners started to look for other places where they could use their expertise. So they started to come to places like southern Wisconsin where there were a lot of lead mines. So the miners that worked here would have worked on Merry Christmas Mine Hill, which is right across the street from us, and they would have been looking for lead and zinc. So that was owned by the New Jersey Zinc Company. So our tour, we're going to talk quite a bit about the mining history here, but most of our tour focuses on the restoration process of these buildings in the 1930s and 40s by a couple named Bob and Edgar. And we have a cutout of them right over here. So this gentleman here is Bob Neal. He is from Mineral Point, Wisconsin. So he is a local here. Prior to his restoration work, he worked as an interior decorator. He trained in New York and then actually worked in London for some time. And then he always had a passion for preserving these old mining homes. And so he started buying these up in 1936 with his partner Edgar Hellum, who is right here. And Edgar is from Stoughton, Wisconsin, so he's not quite a local to Mineral Point, but pretty close. He was working on a restoration project just outside of Dodgeville in 1935 when he came to Mineral Point to look for some materials. So that's when he met Bob. And about a year later, they started buying up their first historic homes together. So that all happened quite fast. And they started a nationally recognized restaurant in Pendarvis House, so we're going to get to see that space and talk a lot more about that. So before we go over to our first historic building, I'm going to give you some of our rules here. So because we do have historic collections in each of the homes, I ask that you not lean on or touch anything. And if anyone needs to sit down at all during the tour, if you ask me, I can point you to a chair that can bear weight, because not all of them can. And then we do allow photography, but no flash photography. Also, just as kind of a warning, a lot of our doors are quite short, so as you're going through the tour, you'll notice some uneven ground. A couple of the doors are sort of a step up and duck situation, so I will try and warn you about those as we come to them. So whenever you're ready, we're going to start heading out this back door here, and I will lead the way, so you can follow me. So this building right behind me is Pendarvis House. In the 1800s, when the miners would have lived here, limestone homes like this would have followed the street all the way down on both sides because this was a neighborhood called Shake Rag under the hill. So this is where most of the miners lived, and it was considered to be kind of a poorer area of Mineral Point. So we got the name Shake Rag because right across the street there is Merry Christmas Mine Hill. So that's where the miners would have been working all day. And at the end of the day, when they had to come down for supper, their wives would stand on the front porch and shake a white rag at them. And that was their signal that they had to come down off the hill. So the neighborhood was called Shake Rag. And then Bob and Edgar, who we're going to talk more about, they actually had this street named Shake Rag in the 1940s. So that's what it is today, is Shake Rag Street. So the miners would have lived here in the 1800s, and if we fast forward a little bit to the 1930s, a lot of these buildings were falling into disrepair, and many were being torn down. So if you look right across the street there is the public pool. That is made all out of limestone, and that is all recycled materials from Shake Rag Street homes that were torn down. So these buildings were kind of endangered, and that's why Bob and Edgar decided that they wanted to start buying up these historic homes. So Pendarvis was the first home that Bob and Edgar bought. They got this house in 1936 for $10, which they thought was a really awesome deal, and then they found out that the previous owner owed about $200 in back taxes. So not quite as good as they were hoping. If you look to either side of Pendarvis here, there isn't a lot of yard associated to just this building, and Edgar really liked gardening. He wanted to have a large garden, and Bob wanted to get this birch tree right over here. And so they went over to their neighbors on this side and asked if they would be willing to sell a little bit of land so that they could have a larger yard. Their neighbors said they didn't really want to sell the land, but they would sell the house and the land, and that would cost about $450. So even though this was the time of the Great Depression and money was kind of tight, Bob and Edgar did decide that they wanted to do that, so they started monthly payments on this second building, which they named Polpero. and that was in 1937. And then shortly after that, they purchased this third home over here, which is Trelawney. And that's the one that Bob and Edgar lived in the longest. They lived there for about 40 years. And we'll get to go in each of these 3 buildings. So Bob and Edgar did live in all of these buildings, but after they moved out of Pendarvis, they decided that they wanted to use that space to gain a little revenue, because having a restoration process like this is very costly and it can take a lot of time. So they started Pendarvis as a tea room. They had a little sign out front here that said Cornish tea served. And they would have served the people of Mineral Point. So they served their friends in Mineral Point, and then their friends told their friends, and it slowly expanded. And then one day, a journalist named Betty Cass from the Wisconsin State Journal was just happening through Mineral Point, and she saw the Cornish tea served sign, and she decided to eat with them. And she enjoyed her experience so much that she actually wrote an article about them in the State Journal. And that's when they started to get a little more recognition from larger cities like Madison, and everyone wanted to come down and see this little restaurant in Mineral Point. So they named this Pendarvis House Restaurant. We have the shield right there. And this is the first building that we're gonna head inside. So I will unlock this door, and do be careful as you're stepping up on the stairs here, because they're very uneven. So this is Pendarvis House Restaurant. This is the dining area right here. They fit about 20 to 25 people in here, but Bob and Edgar were more comfortable at 20 because it's not the largest space. So I'm sure this is where Bob's interior decorating past came in handy, because he knew how to stage this space. So Pendarvis House Restaurant served traditional Cornish fare, so things like pasty, if you've ever heard of that. That's a traditional Cornish dish that miners would have taken up to the hill with them. So it's made of beef, potatoes, and usually some sort of vegetable like rutabaga, and then it's baked together in a dough shell, if you think kind of like a calzone or a pot pie. And the ones that they made here were very large. They served about 6 people, so we'll get to see a picture of them later. They're very tall. So that was very fun. They also served things like saffron cakes, which is a Cornish dessert, and they did tea and clotted cream, things like that, left over from the tea house as well. So this restaurant, though it's small, did eventually grow to be quite famous. They were featured in Duncan Hines' Adventures in Good Eating. We have a sign right back here that says recommended by Duncan Hines. So that was a very famous book of its time. There were some rules when you came to this restaurant here. You did have to make a reservation. They didn't allow walk-ins. You had to call ahead, and when you called, you would place your order. So you couldn't have any walk-ins. In fact, there's a famous story that John F. Kennedy, during his presidential campaign, tried to stop here, and they had to turn him away because he didn't have a reservation, so they couldn't fit him in. So you did have to have a reservation. They were very serious about that policy. You also had to arrive to your reservation on time. They tried to set it up so that your pasty or whatever you had ordered would be coming out of the oven right at your reservation time. So you could sit down and eat right away. And if you missed your reservation time, your food was actually given away to a local artist family. So you could come here, but there was nothing for you. And eventually they did grow to national fame. They were featured in a magazine as one of the 7 best restaurants in the United States. So you can look around this space. I think there are some bees flying around in here, so just be careful. They get in no matter what.
Do you know when the restaurant closed?
Not until 1970. 1970 is when Bob and Edgar retired, and so that's when they transferred the site over to the state to become a museum.
You know where the meat comes from?
Oh.
Who actually prepared the food? Did they also cook?
Bob did that, yes. So he did all of the cooking for the restaurant. Then Edgar was more of the outdoor work, so he did the gardens and things like that. Did you have a question?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to ask you, where does the name Pendarvis?
It's actually named after an estate in Cornwall. So we're gonna...
You mentioned a garden. Does that mean they grew some of their restaurant food in that garden?
I would think so. The entirety of the grounds here were basically gardens. They were wildflower gardens and different things that Edgar had taken care of. We actually had to uproot a lot of it this summer because it had turned to weeds. So not very pretty anymore. So we're working on restoring the gardens right now. Yes.
Do you have recipes? The recipes?
We do. We're actually in the process of making recipe cards that we can sell in the shop, but they're not out quite yet. So you can come back and visit us again, and hopefully we'll have those.
Were there any of the materials that showed what the menus were like, what all the things that were served?
We don't have all of the menus. They did have quite a few different ones, but we will see some menus in the next building. So we're going to take a step out here before someone gets stung by a bee.
Where do they do the cooking?
Another interesting fact about this building, this one was built in the 1830s, and Bob and Edgar added on this second section that we just walked through. So initially when the miners would have lived here, it would have been just that dining room space that we were in at first. So if you can imagine living with your whole family in just that room. There was a little storage crawl space in the ceiling, but other than that, that was your whole house. So we're definitely a little more spoiled than that today. So we can head over down to this courtyard space down here. Do be careful because the stones are a little uneven. And careful down here, there are quite a few walnuts around, so just watch your step. So this space back here is a courtyard for the restaurant. So this would have been set with tables and chairs, and then this feature over here would have been a waterfall. So it would have been very pretty back here. If you were waiting for your reservation time, which I hope you were early for your reservation, so you'd have to wait. You could wait back here, and if it was nice out, you could even eat back here. So a lot of the more famous visitors to the restaurant actually did eat back here. They had one of the leaders of the UN, and they also had two authors on the same weekend, which Bob and Edgar were really excited about. So Marjorie Kinning Rawlings and Sinclair Lewis came here on the same weekend, and both of them ate back here in the courtyard. So this would have been a very, very pretty space. And again, all of the gardens would have been throughout here as well and on top of the water feature. This building, incoming.
We're getting attacked.
This building here is Trelawney. So this is where Bob and Edgar lived. If you look at the stonework on the back here, it's quite uneven. A lot of smaller pieces are used and the face of it isn't very flat. This style of stonework is called rubble. When we move around to the front of the building, you'll notice that the front stones are much smoother. That's because they used all of the best stones on the front of the house and then just a little bit onto the side. So if anyone was looking at the home, you would think that that continued all the way to the back, when in fact it did not. So the back was more of a rubble look. So no one would know unless you put a courtyard back here and then everybody gets to see it. So I personally like both styles, but we can walk around to the front of the building here and we will get to see the smoother style as well. You can follow me through here. And right about here on Trelawney and Pendarvis is where it starts to smooth out. Yep, sorry, a little crowded. But if you look at the front of this building, it is quite a bit smoother than the back there. So this building is Trelawney. We talked a little bit about the naming of these buildings, but I'm going to tell you about the other names as well. So when Bob and Edgar started buying these homes, one of their friends had told them that typically Cornish buildings do have Cornish names. And so their friend gave them a list of Cornish names, and they picked the ones that they liked or that had meaning to them. So that's how Pendarvis got its name, named after an estate in Cornwall. Trelawney is named after a 17th century English bishop. And then Polperro, the next one we're going to see, was named after a fishing village in Cornwall. So Trelawney is where Bob and Edgar lived together for about 40 years, and we have it set for their 1940s home. So we can head inside here. And you can go straight into that dining room area. Piece on the restoration process here, and so they sent some photographers to take pictures throughout the house. So we have all of those pictures of Trelawney in the 1940s on this table here, so you can compare the house how it looked then to how it looks now. So I'll let you look around a little bit.
Fireplaces are named for like spilling the smoke out into
Oh,
the
yeah.
rooms and stuff out.
Yeah.
When this was a Cornish home, that would have been cold storage.
Door or whatever?
Yeah, so the butter, milk, things like that were stored in there because of the limestone walls. When Bob and Edgar lived here, they didn't like having modern conveniences sitting out. They liked it to look pretty authentic, and so that's where they hid their phone. So if you call Pendarvis House Restaurant, it rang from the box. And
Were
then
either of them actually Cornish?
Bob had Cornish roots.
Okay.
Edgar did not. And then on the stool here, there is a book called On the Shake Rag. So this is actually a book by Edgar Hellum. We have these in our gift store. It's a first-hand account of what the restoration process was like here and what it was like to live at Pendarvis. So that's a really great resource if you just want to look through it when you're in the store. It's got some really fun pictures. So that's a really fun thing. And whenever you're ready, we can head up into this next space. Do be careful, there are 2 steps here and the ceiling's a little low. Alright, so I'm going to talk about all of our pictures in here. You might not be able to see all of them from the angle that you're at, but I'll let you move around in a little bit. So, this space back here is an addition onto Trelawney. This was not an original part of the mining home. Bob and Edgar added this so that they could have a more modern kitchen. So this picture right back here is how the kitchen would have looked when Bob and Edgar were living here. And that is Bob cooking there, so he did all of the cooking for the restaurant right back here. Then right next to that photo is a photo of the courtyard that we were just in. And then Edgar is the one peeking out the door there. And Edgar did a lot of the outdoor work. He was very good at gardening. And then right behind us here is, well, behind me, is a picture of the restaurant when that was still in operation. So it's a little easier to imagine when you see a picture like this how they would have fit 20 to 25 people. And this is only half the room. So it was staged quite well. It was a very comfy space. There isn't a lot of seating for smaller parties. There are 2 tables with 2 chairs, but typically if you were a smaller party, you were seated with another small party at a larger table. So you got to meet some new people, and we do have quite a few instances where people would schedule their second visit for exactly a year from their first and have everyone at the table do it so that you could be with the same people that you had met here. Because it was a very social experience. You got to meet new people, and Bob and Edgar met everyone that came in through the door. So it was very personal.
It looks like they allowed children. Is that his
Yes,
child?
they did. They do have a child seat up there. And then in the case up front here, we do have some more artifacts for the restaurant. So there are some menus on the top layer here. There's one for pasty, which was kind of the trademark here. They also have roast beef and beef churro. So the pasty here is $4 according to this menu, and that's because it did feed 6. So it sounds kind of expensive for the 1940s, but it was a big pasty. In fact, this picture over here, this large dish here is a pasty dish. So this is Bob and Edgar's dining room, this photo, and this is their Cornish tea leaf china. So that's the pasty dish. It's quite large. And this is actually a really fun photo because Bob is serving pasty here, and he is serving to Charlie Curtis. And Mr. Curtis is also pictured over on the wall by the window there. He's in his 80s in these photos, and he was a very good stonemason. He started his stonemasonry career in his early teens, and he actually grew to be quite famous. He did the work on Taliesin, some of the work for the Frank Lloyd Wright House, so he was very good at his job. And when he heard what Bob and Edgar were doing here, he thought that that was a really great project, and he decided to come and help them. So he taught Bob and Edgar all about stonemasonry because it's very hard to fix up old homes like this. So he was really instrumental to the process here. He helped them a lot. And then we have a few pictures of the restoration right over here. So I will let you look around a little bit, and you can kind of shuffle around if there's something you can't see. And if you have any questions, just let me know.
Wisconsin have any architectural standards for buildings like this if you want to renovate them? Do you have to meet certain standards?
If you are on the Register of Homes, Register of Historic Homes, I know that there are a lot of regulations to fix up old buildings. For the state, we just try and be as accurate as we can. So, for example, we just redid the porch on the row house up the hill, and we had to build it the exact same way that they had built it. So it's in the Cornish tradition, it is not anchored to the building, it is freestanding, which is not really up to our safety standards of today, but it's how it was.
Interesting.
Don't run into this. But this building was built in 1836 by the Kislingberry family. And you can tell that this family put a little extra money into their home because this is a 3-story building. So for a mining home, it's quite large, especially compared to one like Pendarvis that is just that one room. So this space that we're standing in is the main room. The space we just walked through would have been the kitchen. And then the 3rd story was for the children. They had 5 children here, so they had their own space up there. And it looks pretty much identical to this, just no fireplace. So some interesting features of this house here are our bed over here. So that is a rope bed. The mattress looks a little lumpier than what we're used to. That's because it would have been stuffed with straw. So excuse me, I can show you the ropes here. So underneath the mattress here is a series of ropes all tied together here. So every day you would have to tighten up those ropes so that your mattress would lay flat. And that's actually where the expression sleep tight comes from, is tightening up the ropes in your rope bed. And then these little knobs on the side, so these ones, those are also known as bed bugs. I do not think that those were biting though. I think it was probably the bed bugs that were in your straw. But maybe a little bit of both. But yeah, you can look around this space and ask me any questions you might have. And again, do watch your heads.
So they call those little knobs bed bugs.
Yep.
Is the upstairs permanently closed off?
That one we use for storage, so we don't use that as a part of the tour. We have a lot less original things from the miners because this was a poorer area of town, so when they got moved, they took their stuff with them, and I'm sure they never thought there was going to be a museum here for their lives, so they didn't really leave anything here. So we try and get stuff of the period, but not much of it is original to the mining days.
But I mean, like the floors.
Like
and
these
things.
timbers
Yeah,
and stuff,
things
these
like
are all
that.
original?
Oh, okay. A lot of the buildings were falling into a decent amount of disrepair when Bob and Edgar got them. So there are pieces that are redone, but they tried to keep as much original as they could. So I know in this building, a couple of the main beams had to be replaced, but I'm not sure which ones would have been. They're not on this floor, they're downstairs. But
And when did the mining industry basically decline? Like it started, obviously people are here in the 30s of 1830 until,
1912 is when Merry
Oh.
Christmas Mine Hill closed. And
got it.
if you look at the census for Mineral Point, 1912 is really high, and then it just drops because all of the miners left. They tried to look for other places where they could mine. A lot of them went west to try and get on the gold rush,
Oh.
or they went to other lead mines in the area. So Mineral Point had a very high population when the mine was operational, and then it dropped off drastically, and so it became a very small town instead of the kind of industrial area that it was.
Do you know what the population was back then?
I don't know exactly what the population was, but I know that the population for the time was more than that of Milwaukee for the same time period. So it was a big city. They had a lot of people here.
Huh.
And then of course when the miners left, it became a teeny tiny town. And that was actually something that Bob and Edgar were really passionate about, was trying to get more tourism and more people to come to Mineral Point and kind of up its population again.
Does that mean the borders of the town had to change because the municipality couldn't do anything with nobody living there? Did the borders of the town change?
I am not sure about that. We actually have a historic map of Mineral Point on a postcard over in the gift shop though, so if you want to take a look at that, that would be a good one. I'm not sure that they all lived exactly in the town or if it was surrounding area. But yeah, it was quite the industrial area. There were a lot of people working here.
Do you know if a lot of the miners owned their own homes, or did somebody basically rent them out to the miners?
As far as I know, most of them were owned. If you were kind of a shorter term miner, and this is something I typically talk about downstairs, but yeah, if you were a shorter term miner, you didn't think you were going to stay here very long, or your family wasn't over here yet, you might actually live in a badger hole. So up on the mine hill there, you can just dig into the side of the hill, and they called them badger holes, and that's where they lived. So that's actually where we get the name Badger State, is from the badgers that lived in the side of the mines, not the badgers, the animals. So they called them badgers because they looked dirty, they lived in holes. But yeah, they would just dig a small house into the side of a hill.
Not in winter though.
I have never heard about what they do in winter. I've never heard that they moved out of them, but I'm not sure. Yeah, that was considered short-term housing, so
Okay.
I'm sure they didn't want to stay in there too long. It was usually if your house was being built or if your family was coming over and you didn't have somewhere to stay yet, you would live in a badger hole.
Wow.
So that's where we got the name the Badger State. Yeah, so whenever you're done looking around in here, we can head back out to this kitchen here. Do be careful and watch your head again. Alright, so this space we have set up to talk a little bit more about mining. This basement would have looked a little different when the Kisling-Berries lived here. It would have been what we considered an unfinished basement, so dirt floors, stone walls. But Bob and Edgar decided that they wanted to use this space for an antique store, so they fixed it up a little bit here, because you probably don't want dirt floors in your antique store. So that's why it looks a little more modern in this space. But talking a little bit more about the mining history. So the Cornish that came over here from Cornwall were very experienced miners. Most of them had been doing it for some time, and they knew how to do things like use explosives and clear groundwater out of a mine if you dug too deep. So they got a lot of ore out of the hills. They were very good miners. So we have tools all on the walls here. A lot of these ones over on this wall are for explosives, things like the charging spoon, the shooting needle, and then there's a fuse right in front of the shooting needle. We also have some forms of lighting for the mine on the wall. So the wood plank with the candles on it, that is early lighting for a mine. So when we think of mining, we think of the hard helmets with the light on the front. But originally they didn't have that. They just had candles that mounted into the side of the walls. So you would bring candles down into the mine, and then these candle mounts had two options. So one side is a hook if you find something to hook it to, and if not, the other side is a spike. So you just jam it in the wall there. So that is how you lit your mine. Eventually they did get the hard helmets with a lamp on the front, like this gentleman in the back here is wearing. There was an in-between option in which you had a hard helmet that had a candle mount on it. So you could have your candle on it, which doesn't seem very safe to me, but you could have your candle right on your hat. And then right across the street here, you can see a little bit in this window, is Merry Christmas Mine Hill. So right now that's a very lush green space because we have restored it to a natural prairie. But at the time that the miners would have lived here, that would have been entirely barren. So this photo right here is how Merry Christmas Mine Hill would have looked when it was still in operation. So no trees, no vegetation. And there were really two reasons for that. One was that they had a very large smelter, so anything that was green on the hill was coming down and going in the smelter. Also, the smelter released fumes that were not really good for plants or probably for people. So it wasn't just on the hill, really no vegetation grew in this whole area. It was very barren. So not quite as pretty as it is today. And then on the opposite wall here is a picture of, this is more towards downtown Mineral Point. So this is a couple more mining buildings. You can see if you look in the air there, all of the black smog coming off of the smelters. So the air quality here was very poor. It was said that if it rained, you could taste it in the back of your throat. So just not good stuff. So I will let you look around a little bit, and if you have any questions, let me know. All of this land on top of the hill. So there are a couple more buildings up there. They're not open for touring right now. One for structural issues and the other because we use it for storage. But one of them is called Hillcott. That is the guest house that Bob and Edgar would have used when people came to visit them. It looks a little bit similar to our orientation center here, but much larger. We also have a row house. The row house is actually 3 different homes built directly together. Interestingly enough, the 2 on the ends built first, and then the center one built later. So I'm sure that the neighbors were thrilled. But those are both on top of the hill, and there are walking trails all throughout the ground. So you can take a look at how large our space is here, and the intricate stonework that Bob and Edgar had done to make stairs and make all of these accessible. So there are guides for the walking trails as well, also in the gift shop. And then just a final reminder, there is a survey inside of your visitor guide. So if you fill that out and bring it back to the gift shop, they will give you a free magnet. So incentive. But thank you everybody for coming, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.